Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. I'm back today with another episode from our series, Big Names in the Bible. Today we're focusing again on the stories about the prophet Elisha. And today I'm going to tell you one of the most memorable stories for which Elisha is known. It comes to us from the book of 2 Kings chapter 5. And here's how the story unfolds. The writer of 2 Kings opens this chapter by telling us about a man named Naaman. Naaman was a commander in the Syrian army. He was favored by the king. Naaman was also a mighty and powerful warrior. That's why he rose to the position of being in charge of all the armies in Syria. Nevertheless, after that glowing description, the writer of 2 Kings tells us that Naaman had leprosy. Now, leprosy is a disease that is often spoken of in the Bible. Leprosy is a skin disease, and it covers everything from itchy rashes to the kind of sickness in which a person's skin can actually rot and cause a person's limbs and fingers and toes to fall off. Now, the writer of 2 Kings doesn't go into detail about Naaman's leprosy, but we can assume that because Naaman wanted desperately to be healed, that his case must have been pretty bad. Well, as the story goes, there is a young girl serving in the household of Naaman. She is from Israel, and she was taken captive when Naaman had made a raid into the land of Israel. She became a slave in his house. She hears about Naaman's disease, and so she says to the head of the household, "Oh, if Naaman would only go and see the prophet Elisha. Elisha could make him well. Elisha could heal him." Well, the head of the household passes along this word, and Naaman is intrigued. Apparently, he's willing to try anything. So Naaman goes to his king and says, "I have heard that there is a prophet in Israel who might be able to make me well. May I go?" The king says yes, and he also writes a letter. And that letter is addressed to the king of Israel, and it says, "I am sending Naaman to you. He is not coming to make war. He is coming because he is seeking healing. He is trying to learn who this prophet is and where he lives." And so with the letter in hand, Naaman assembled a huge caravan of soldiers and servants and all kinds of treasure and gifts, and he makes his way to Israel. Well, as the story goes, Naaman eventually learns where Elisha is, and he journeys to Elisha's house, and he stops outside the house, and he sends a messenger to tell Elisha that he is here and that he seeks to meet with him. The messenger goes, knocks on Elisha's door. Elisha opens the door and simply says to the messenger, "Just go tell your master to take a bath 7 times in the Jordan River." And with that, Elisha closes the door. The servant goes back and tells Naaman, "The prophet is not coming out to meet you. He says all you have to do is go to the Jordan River and take a bath 7 times. Well, Naaman is furious. He is so angry. He's about to storm off and leave in a huff. But one of his servants comes to him and says, "Oh, Naaman, what if the prophet had asked you to do something great? Wouldn't you have done it?" Naaman thought for a minute and said, "Yes, well, I'm a soldier. I'm a warrior. And yes, I'm accustomed to trying to do great things, impossible things, hard things. Well, the unspoken part of that servant's question, if you're willing to do something hard, shouldn't you be willing to do something simple? So Naaman thought about it for a moment and decided that yes, he would go and do what the prophet told him to do, even though he had expected so much more from the prophet. He had expected perhaps that when he showed up, Elisha would have come out, made a big show about him, maybe brought down some kind of signs from heaven, some spectacular display of God's power to bring his healing. But instead, he's simply told, go take a bath in this muddy old Jordan River. Well, Naaman decides to do that simple thing. And as you might expect, when Naaman does that, he is healed of his leprosy. It leaves him. Extraordinarily grateful for the work of God in his life, Naaman returns to Elisha's house and tries to give him all of the treasure he has brought as a sign of his gratitude. Elisha refuses to accept those gifts, and Naaman returns back to his home country, convinced that Elisha's God is the one true God. And that's a pretty cool story, and I think you'd have a lot of fun reading it out of 2 Kings chapter 5. Here are the takeaways that I think are worth mentioning to you today. First, let me call our attention to the fact that Naaman's story shows us that there's always more to a person than what we know on the surface. I bet most of you have Facebook or Instagram, maybe TikTok accounts, and you see your friends posting pictures or videos, and invariably in all of them they're smiling, they're happy, they're with their friends, they're laughing. It looks like they're having a good time. And maybe you look at those pictures or those videos and say, wow, they have it all together. I wish I could be like them. What those videos and posts don't show, however, is that despite all of the smiling faces, despite all of the success or the appearance of having it all together, I would bet that most of your friends have problems you don't even know about. Some may have difficult parents at home. Some may have some kind of an illness that you know nothing about. The point is that Naaman shows us that there's always more to a person's story than we can see with the eye. Remember how Naaman was introduced. He was a mighty warrior, a powerful warrior. The king favored him. He was a commander, and yet he had leprosy. It wasn't all success. Everything wasn't all great in Naaman's life. He had some struggles. And this portion of his story reminds us that when we look at our friends and we engage with our friends, we need to remember that despite all of the outward shows of happiness, somebody may be dealing with some pretty tough stuff. And that means that we should be kind. That means that we should treat them as we would want to be treated ourselves. It's also a reminder to us that we don't always have it together either. All of us have struggles. And the trick in learning to live well and do well is to manage the tension or the battle between those things where we look like we've got it all together and the things that make life hard for us. That's one lesson from Naaman's story. The second is this. Remember, I told you that Naaman's journey began because there was a little slave girl who happened to tell her, the head of her household, that there was a prophet in Israel who could bring healing. We don't know how old this girl was. We don't know her name. Nevertheless, she was at a place in which God was able to use her to bring healing to Naaman and to allow other people to learn about how great and good God is. What this tells me is that we don't have to be grown up. We don't have to achieve important places or have important jobs. We don't have to have this or that for God to use us. God can use us at any age, any time, and anywhere. That's the lesson from this little servant girl. And finally, Naaman's story reminds us just how dangerous pride can be. Now, sure, there is some pride that is good. Like, I hope you take pride in the fact that maybe you do your work at school well. I hope maybe you take pride in the fact that maybe you have some skills as an athlete or some skills that you've learned doing other things, and you have confidence in your abilities as a result. That's okay. But the pride that Naaman had was this. He thought so much of himself. He thought he was so big and so important, he almost missed out on what God wanted to do in his life. That can happen to us. We can become so impressed with who we think we are that we make ourselves too big, and we can't accept what God wishes to do for us. Pride can get in the way. And Naaman reminds us that, yeah, sure, I will go and do something great. Maybe I don't need to do something great. Maybe I need to humble myself and do something simple. Pride can block God's work in our lives and thus prevent us from receiving God's best gifts. Well, that's it for today's lesson. We'll continue our study of Elisha's life with another lesson next week. Thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.